Hello everyone, this is NPC's Economics. Total factor productivity measures how productive capital and labor resources are. Effective capital allocation and technological progress contribute to achieving positive productivity growth. Total factor productivity is the portion of economic growth that cannot be explained by increases in the stock of labor and capital. Part of the total factor productivity is labor productivity, which is the portion of economic growth that cannot be explained by increases in the labor stock. Labor productivity is a key driver of economic growth and changes in living standards, measured notably by growth in GDP per capita. Growth in labor productivity indicates a higher level of output for every hour worked. In the fourth quarter of 2023, non-farm business sector labor productivity increased 3.2%. The Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates labor productivity, or output per hour, as an index of real output divided by an index of hours worked by all workers, which include employees, proprietors, and unpaid family workers. What does this number mean? In Q4 2023, output increased 3.5% and hours worked increased 0.3%. While this number is a nice rebound from the abysmal readings from 2021 and 2022, labor productivity has pretty much stalled since the spike in 2020. Furthermore, labor productivity growth had generally been lower since the 2010s, when the Federal Reserve began the era of zero interest rate policy, compared to the previous periods. If you look at real GDP growth per capita, this trend is even more pronounced. Real GDP growth per 1,000 people had hardly exceeded 0.1 since the Great Recession, whereas the average for the period before 1990s was about double the current periods. So why the drag on productivity growth? One plausible explanation is debt. The US economy runs on debt, and the US government's expenditure as a share of GDP is at its highest point since after World War II and climbing. As the government grows larger, real GDP per capita's growth rate falters and the economy grows weaker. Spending financed by debt is one helluva drug. In this 2021 Nature.com article, banker Dunfield, Huang, and Prelec found that when people borrow and spend money, it is really the reward centers of the brain that become activated. And it seems that the US government, which is controlled by the select few rich and powerful, is no exception. A study from 2011 by Burr and Henriksen, titled Government Size and Growth, a survey and interpretation of the evidence, stated that an increase in government spending by 10 percentage points is associated with 0.5 to 1% lower annual growth rate. A 2010 study by Reinhardt and Rogoff showed that across both advanced and emerging economies, countries with debt-to-GDP ratios greater than 90% have median growth roughly 1.5% lower than that of the less debt-burdened groups, and mean growth almost 3% lower. But how does debt impact economic growth? The simple answer is that each dollar that the US government is spending on servicing debt is each dollar that the government is not spending on public investments. Government fiscal policies affect savings, capital formation, and labor supply, as well as innovation and technological change. Government spending can be counterproductive in several ways. For instance, government spending can discourage capital investments. In a 2017 paper published in Computational Economics, Oibayashi and Takashima showed that GDP decreases with an increase in the inefficiency of public expenditure, which is defined as the ratio of firm subsidies to the government's total expenditure. A multiplier lower than 1 is thought to appear when the degree of inefficiency in public expenditure is sufficiently large and firms are reluctant to invest. In addition to discouraging public investments, Counterproductive government spending can also discourage private investments. In a recent study of 28 OECD countries, Carvelli found that aggregate government expenditure has both a short-run and long-run adverse effects on private investments. Government spending can also create disincentives to work. In the United States, the long-term capital gains tax rate is a measly 10 to 20%, which is much lower than the top marginal rates of working a wagey job. In addition, government fiscal policies can create excessive regulation that increases the cost of economic transaction. Long-term economic growth is mostly driven by productivity and demographics. As productivity growth slows down, it acts as a drag on long-term economic growth. But still, that begs the question, so what? Having a high level of productivity and productivity growth might not necessarily translate to a high standard of living, at least not for the average NPCs. How equitable is the distribution? For example, the United States is known for having a high Gini coefficient among developed countries. Besides, an average NPC can look at how far wage growth has lagged productivity growth. The average NPCs are not incentivized to increase productivity when they know that they work hard so that their bosses and the asset class owners can become richer and richer. Finally, while there are ample academic literatures that support the view that increased government spending leads to less growth, it is not always so cut and dry. For example, in a 2019 paper titled "The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the Economy: New Estimation of the SNAP Multiplier," Canning and Stacy found that a $1 billion in SNAP benefits generated a $1.5 billion in GDP. While the US government is spending more money servicing its debt, the main drivers of the increased spending are mandatory outlays, such as Social Security and Medicare. Should the government make an offering to cut spending in these social programs for the god of productivity? If it wants people to actually revolt instead of being keyboard warriors bitching about it online, then sure, go right ahead. So, what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye!